Welcome back, everyone. Good to see you back after that very short lunch break of 15 minutes, but hopefully you've enjoyed the sessions immediately prior to that. We're kick-starting into our afternoon session with our next keynote, and that keynote is from one of the stalwarts, really, of the sustainability field, Mike Berners-Lee. Mike's a specialist in carbon fingerprinting. He's director of the Small World Consulting. Welcome back, everyone. Good to see you back after that very short lunch break of 15 minutes, but hopefully you've enjoyed the sessions immediately prior. Sorry for that interruption from my own self. So Mike's Small World Consulting is a nod to, obviously, the small is beautiful approach of environmental economics by E.H. Schumacher and the Schumacher College just down the road from us. But Mike's not in the Southwest. He's up in Lancaster, the Environment Centre at the Lancaster University there. And he's written several books over the years that have kind of charted the rise of kind of sustainability action. His One Planet B, There Is No Planet B, talked about after decades of asking politely and getting nowhere, we have a full-scale emergency on our hands. We have to have change, and it must be now. That book was written in 2019. So I want to catch up with Mike and find out what is now. So Mike, if you can come on and tell us where are we now? Please take it.
Well, thank you for that introduction, Ian. Yeah, we are still in a full-on climate emergency. So I'll just get my slides up. Bear with me one sec. Share and okay, so I'm going to talk about a climate of truth, which is the title of a book I'm just finishing off writing at the moment, and touch on, well, when it's also global, what can I do? Because I think a lot of people are asking that kind of question. So to begin with, let's take stock of where we are up to now. Are we still in an emergency situation or not? I'll skip over this slide because you've already heard what I get up to these days. So, where are we up to? Well, the big picture is this. Here's a graph of global energy use by humans, and you can see it's going up and up and up. And as we get more energy at our disposal, we become a more powerful species. And as we become a more powerful species, our power compared to the planet's ability to put itself back together again goes down. And so the world becomes increasingly fragile. And actually, the reason why my company is called Small World Consulting is because it is a response to the fact that the world is becoming increasingly small compared to us as a species. And this rising power that we've got has taken us recently into a completely new situation for humans to be in. And a big word for it is just the Anthropocene. And I'll just use that word very simply to describe this change in context that we're in now. In which we used to be a small species running around on a robust playground of a planet. Suddenly now it's a fragile planet and we're an enormously powerful species and we're the biggest thing affecting the planet. And this whole new context requires a different way of living for humans. It requires us to think differently, to run our societies differently, to do economics differently, to do business differently, to solve problems differently. It's got huge implications for everything that we say, do, and think. And that's difficult for us because it means we have to unpick a lot of stuff that we've learned how to do over centuries or millennia in a different context. And the crisis that we're in at the moment is really a result of our inability so far to make that transition. So we talk about climate crisis a lot, but actually that's just, if you want to deal with climate, you have to see it as one symptom of something bigger that's going on for humanity. So we're in a multi-dimensional challenge, perhaps better referred to as a polycrisis. The physical dimensions of which include climate, the need for an energy transition, the need to make that clean energy transition whilst dealing with a rising population. Whilst dealing with all of that, we need to feed everybody. We need to do that without hemorrhaging our biodiversity, which is currently giving us problems that are just as threatening as the climate crisis. Whilst we do all that, we've got to get on top of an absolute massively rising level of pollution that we have, and we have at the same time a range of disease threats that are coming at us, partly as a result of the way that we're doing our food system. So I've got some really good news about this, which is that from a technical perspective, all these things can be dealt with. But let's have a look at how we are getting on at dealing with these things, because title of this talk and my next book is going to be A Climate of Truth, and it's important that we are truthful with ourselves about how we are getting on. So we've had 28 climate COPs now to try to deal with the climate emergency, and during this time the science has been crystal clear that climate change is a big deal. And let's have a look at our progress that has resulted from those 28 COPs. So here's a graph of global emissions per year from fossil fuel use. And you can see I've drawn a thin line in there for 1995 when we had the first one of those COPs. And if you just stand back and look at that graph, what you can see is there is no detectable evidence, or certainly nothing that the visual eye, that the human eye can detect, to tell us that those COPs have made any difference at all. And to be clear about the height of that line, that rising black line for the CO2 emissions, that represents the speed at which we are moving towards the climate crisis. In other words, it's like it represents the speedometer in a car, maybe. So we are still accelerating into the climate crisis. We're making the climate worse by a larger amount every year than we made it worse by the year before. And I'm not saying this to be depressing. I'm saying it because we have to face that reality. So anybody who says, oh, we're making progress on climate, the facts are against them, we're not. We're still accelerating into the problem. Why is that? Well, I mean, we could unpick this for a long time, but basically there's been some very cynical activity from the fossil fuel industry, very well funded. Many MPs in Parliament at the moment are getting thousands of pounds a year in funding, either directly or indirectly, from the fossil fuel industry and from climate deniers and climate denying think tanks. The Reform Party, just to pull them out, is 92% funded by the fossil fuel industry. And they have been very cynical, very disingenuous, and flat out dishonest with us, resulting in a lot of fake news, a lot of corruption, and one way and another has been a major reason why we've been sleepwalking into the problem, had our heads in the sands. And it's also enabled and been part of a ton of greenwashing. And in my business, I encounter every shade of greenwashing from the business world that you can think of. So all those things have held us back from making the progress that we so urgently need to make. And now, of course, we're getting some symptoms of the climate situation. I don't need to explain these, I don't think, apart from maybe the one in the top, in the middle there. Those puddles represent our craters left by methane exploding out of melting permafrost. And of course, methane is itself a powerful greenhouse gas, which causes more global warming. And when fires break out, that, of course, releases carbon dioxide that causes more warming. And when ice melts, that makes the world absorb more of the sun's energy, and that creates more global warming. So one of the things that the scientific community is only just really very recently starting to roll its sleeves up on is to try and understand this notion of cascading tipping points, the extent to which the symptoms of global warming might lead to yet more symptoms of global warming, and when or if or whether we might reach a point at which we actually trigger a tipping point in the climate, a step change in the climate that will take place no matter what we do about our greenhouse gas emissions, because we've already triggered these cascading, self-reinforcing feedback mechanisms. And the truth is, we don't know. We don't know whether we've already done that. It looks likely that if we take very strong action now, we could, in broad terms, get away with it. But it's one thing's clear is that the symptoms of the climate emergency are going to get significantly worse, whatever we do. And I think it looks pretty clear that if we don't take very strong action now, they're going to hit us very hard indeed, within my life expectancy for sure. And I'm nearly 60 now. And, certainly within the lives of most people on this call and definitely their kids. So it's not something we should be ignoring. But that's odd, isn't it? Because if you turn on the radio every morning, the overall impression that you'll get, you might occasionally hear a mention of climate change, but the overall impression you'll get is that the appropriate response to this is, broadly speaking, to carry on as normal. And that's absolutely not the case. I know we've heard about some records that have been broken, and I just want to emphasize a few things about this. So this is Antarctic sea ice. So last year it was 11% below the previous low on the 7th of August, and that low was only set the year before. And I just want to emphasize what a large amount that record has been broken by. If somebody broke the 100-meter sprint record by a couple of hundredths of a second, you'd be impressed, but you'd say, well, let's just check they weren't on drugs. But if they broke it by a second, you'd say something's completely not right here. And that's what's happened here. We've really, 11% is a ginormous break of a record. Here we have sea temperature, and, possibly, a quarter of a degree-ish for a whole year, above what it's ever been before since 1979. That's not just tweaking a record, that's absolutely smashing it by what should be an incredibly alarming amount. And just to reinforce the point, this is global surface temperature for September's, and this is it in September 2023. It's about half a degree above the previous record. So I'm not saying that this means we've triggered a cascading tipping points already. There's some El Nino in this for sure, but El Ninos, are dotted throughout the timeline on this graph that you're looking at now. But I am saying that, if we were in a situation where we triggered something that we really couldn't stop, the first symptoms of it might look a little bit like this. And then finally, just in terms of things we should be worried about, what we really don't understand at all well is the extent to which human society is capable of dealing with the increasingly serious symptoms of climate change, including threats to the fuel system and so on, to the food system. And we know how easily wars can break out, and civil strife can break out. And so these are the kind of really big unknowns. And I think it's easy for people in the UK to think, oh, well, we'll be all right because we're kind of a well-off island and the rest of the world might have a bit of a difficult time, but, we'll kind of be all right here. And I think that is extremely limited, unimaginative thinking. There's no way, we're part of a global society, like it or not. So that's what I think is a kind of a take on where we're at the moment. Don't worry, this isn't a depressing talk, I hope, overall, but we do need to kind of lay these things out. So, and I think it's important not to over dramatize the situation. I also think it's really important not to underestimate it. I think it's important to try and put across as realistic an assessment of where we're at. And most people I talk to in talks, I sometimes do surveys. I won't do this because I haven't got that long this time, but I sometimes ask, who thinks I've got this about right? Who thinks I've underestimated? Who thinks I've overestimated? And always the balance of the room is that people think that, if anything, I've underestimated. So we're in this situation where we kind of, we know it. And now we can either choose to look the other way, but we can never again say we didn't know. So now for some good news, and I'm going to have to talk quickly because of time. But from a technical perspective, we can get on top of this. This is my sketch. I'm not going to talk through the detail of what the energy transition would look like. The biggest things that we don't talk about enough are we need to cut fossil fuel use. And we need to reduce total energy demand, which is entirely possible and doable. And then if we do those two things, then all the rest of the technologies will just it can quite happily fall into place. One quick slide on the food system, just to show that on the left-hand side, we grow an enormous number of calories per person per day, nearly 2.5 times what we need, plus as much again in grass for our cattle. And the biggest thing that goes wrong in the food system is that we feed so much, all that brown stuff. If you look at the what we use it for column, everything in brown there, we feed to farm animals, and they give us back just the stuff in red. So there's an enormous inefficiency in having so much meat and dairy in our diet, and we can liberate so much capacity for biodiversity and for better nutrition and so on if we just change the proportion a lot of the amount of meat and dairy in our diet. So these are the physical components of the climate, of the polycrisis. Why aren't we dealing with them? Because they're technically solvable. Well, that takes us into the question of things like politics, media, business, inequality, economics growth, our relationship to technology, and the way we do education. And this is interesting because they're hard to change, but there are things that we can do about all of this. And in particular, we've got an election coming up. And I'm not going to be party political on this, but I am going to talk about some principles for how we might vote, since it's so timely at the moment. And then right at the center, I think at the core of all this is some thinking, which I haven't got time to talk about, some ways in which we think, but also critically some values that we now absolutely need to have if the 8 billion of us on this planet are going to thrive together. And I'll mention these very quickly. This is all in my last book, There's No Planet B. But, we need to get much better at respecting everybody in the world, giving equal value to all lives, whether they're Israeli, Palestinian, Ukrainian, Russian, British, American, or whatever. We need to get much better at respecting the truth, which I'm going to talk about now, and of course, much better at respecting the environment. Just on truth, which I think is the most critical lever. If anyone's asking, well, what can I do in all of this? I think pushing for higher standards of honesty across business, media, and politics is the single biggest leverage area that we can have if we want to deal with climate. And the reason for that is because the more I look at climate, all the bad decisions on climate have dishonesty at their root. So when we come to looking at our political leaders and our sources of media, all of us need to get very, very astute at asking which ones do we trust? What is our basis for deciding that we can trust them? And how can we make sure when we go to the ballot box that we always vote for the most trustworthy candidate that has a realistic chance of getting elected? And I'll talk about that a bit more in a second. And with our media as well, what is the basis by which we trust our media? Who owns it? What's their track record on trust? What's their motivation? Do they own up when they make a mistake? And if we've got a reason to think that we can't trust our media, perhaps, for example, because it might be owned by a billionaire who has a track record of demonstrating that they've got a vested interest and they push their own political agenda for their own reasons, then don't touch any of their papers with a barge pole. And we actually need to do a bit more than that. Also, and I know this is tricky, but if we actually want the change, then we need to, if any of our friends, colleagues, or relatives are reading papers that are owned by disingenuous ownership or don't have a track record of being careful with the truth, then we need to challenge it, because it's having a desperate effect on the way that life works in this country and around the world, and our ability to deal with the climate crisis. So here's a principle about honesty. Take this for a politician. If a politician deliberately misleads us ever on any subject at all, that tells us a lot. It tells us that they can't be trusted, again, on that particular topic. But it also tells us more generally that they're not trustworthy. It tells us they can't be trusted on anything at all that we care about. And it tells us that they can't ever be trusted on anything we care about. So, for example, if a politician were to have been sacked twice for dishonesty as a journalist, it tells you that they will, for all time, be unsuitable to be a politician unless they have some very unusual kind of experience that makes them trustworthy. And it tells you one other thing as well, and this is really important. This is the seventh Nolan principle about standards of leadership in public life. It tells you that any of their colleagues who stay quiet in the knowledge that they're being dishonest is also unfit to be a politician. So just reflect on that for a moment, because it's got huge implications for who of our politicians are fit and unfit for purpose. Okay, so to get closer to wrapping up, because this question, when it's all so global, what can any of us do? I think the way to frame the question is, how can I help to create the conditions under which humanity can undergo the huge systemic change that it so urgently needs? Which I think is a more empowering way than just saying, well, how can I cut my carbon footprint? There's just so much more you can do than that. And then a quote from James Baldwin: the first thing is to face the situation we're in, because not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing that can be changed until it is faced. So we need to face up to the realities that we are careering into a massive crisis at the moment, and it's not okay to just switch off as if that's not happening, or to pretend that some sort of technological fix alone will get us through it. For speed, I'm just going to skip a slide. So the way to look at the challenge is to ask, what is most needed in the world out there? What are the things that I'm good at or could become good at? And how can my response be a fit between those two things? And that might take you into campaigning, it might take you into business consulting, it might take you into academia, it might take you into doing the job that you do in the business that you're in, or in a particular way. But and so it's a unique question for each of us to answer, but that is how to go about answering it. And then finally, almost finally, we're in this absolutely flat out race between tipping points. I've got some examples there at the top of the screen of some of the things that are going on, which, I think give me hope. Businesses doing some of the right things, people taking to the streets in the right kind of way. Is the big social wake up going to happen faster? And MP Watch is worth a shout if you are looking for which MPs to trust. Or is the climate going to tip against us first? It's a flat out race now, and we all have a responsibility to play our part as best we possibly can in it. Quick action checklist, final slide. On politics, just make sure you are voting for somebody who gets this and is properly going to be active on this. You may find that in the first past the post system, it's you have to vote for the best candidate that stands a realistic chance of being selected. It's so important. And then we need to pressure our politicians and insist on really high standards of honesty, and we need to insist that they take strong climate action. Media information, we need to be all of us be very careful about which media we support. Do not pay money to corrupt media, and don't even read their messages, because they have so much influence over the way that we think. At work, challenge our workplaces. Ask the questions: to what extent is my place of work helping to create the conditions under which humanity can get on top of the poly crisis? And if it's not right, either leave or push for change within it. And then, of course, how we live is also influential and brings integrity to everything else. And that's questions about everything I buy, and maybe the things that I don't buy, our banking and our investment, our diet, our transport, home energy, and our community. To what extent are each of us helping to build the kinds of communities that can live sustainably. So there, as fast as I can get through everything I wanted, most of what I most wanted to say to you. Thank you very much for listening.
Thanks for that, Mike, and thanks for giving us some time for questions. We've got about 5 minutes. There's lots of questions. Some of them are quite technical about some different aspects of the science. So I think what I'd like to do is draw back to you, because your general meta point really is about truth and
Yeah, it is.
particularly information. So there's one in particular which a lot of the universities are grappling with about the fossil fuel divestment. You've talked about how important
Yes.
fossil fuels is, and its insidious nature, the way that the tendrils reach in. Academia is involved as any. So the question is about fossil. Have you acted on this at Lancaster? And there's a question about Plymouth. And a few years ago, I looked at this at Plymouth, but I'd be interested in how you take on that tricky subject at Lancaster.
Well, my role, just to be clear, I'm 4 days a week. I run a business based in Lancaster, and I have a small academic role. And I think all universities face, really difficult challenges over this. I think divestment from fossil fuel is really, really important. But I also think that there are challenging questions, and I know all universities are feeling hard up at the moment, but there are really hard, challenging questions about who we work with and who we take money from. So I know, just to give an example, at Small World, we had a big defense manufacturer keen as mustard to give us a big contract, BAE Systems. We had a good think about this. We decided we're not pacifists. But that means we do believe in a defense industry. But on the other hand, we had a look at BAE Systems and found the evidence for massive scale corruption so compelling that we said no to them. But I ended up having to explain myself to the head of faculty. Well, why did my business do that? Because this business takes money from BAE Systems and so on. And all these are very tricky dilemmas. And I think universities just have to be pretty bold on this, because we are in a climate crisis. I mean, I don't want to spell out the specific decisions that everything should make, but it's more than just fossil fuels.
Mm. Yeah, it is tricky. And I remember certainly at the Plymouth, we had an embarrassingly little amount, but in the sense of most places have got huge, amounts of money coming in. We were terrible, but actually, weirdly, some of the money we were coming in for fossil fuel foundations that were trying to transfer across, and we're actually funding biodiversity projects and things like that. So it starts to become very, very messy and things like that about where the money is actually going.
Sometimes bad organizations use a bit of philanthropic money to try and cleanse their reputations, and it's not worth it to take that money, because the extent to which you do harm by helping them prop up their reputations is worse than the benefit of the good work you do with their money.
I wanted to jump to the other side. There was a question that came in just at the end there, which was talking about, social media, and that had been very important. And that's such a messy, sprawling world. Your world was about newspapers, which are kind of pretty well organized. What about social media? Where do you start?
Yeah, okay. So I'm not as such a big expert on social media. I drag myself onto some social media reluctantly, just occasionally. But what I would say is, so for example, on Twitter, I'm still going to call it Twitter, some good rules of thumb. Don't follow anybody unless you have independently decided that they're a trustworthy source, using sources of information that come from outside of social media. So, and I think that goes for all social media. You make up your mind yourself who you're interested in following. And then the other thing is choose what you're looking at. Don't let the social media tell you who they think you'd like to be looking at. So I try and make sure I quickly scroll past any ads, try not to look at them at all. And I would never trust Twitter or X to suggest what I should be looking at, because I think that just takes you into a world where you're being subtly influenced in a way that's actually very hard to be resistant to.
And just kind of a final question, really, what the role and responsibility of not just universities, but academics in all of this in terms of the climate of truth. I mean, how do we need to be careful that we're not kind of framing it still, in the sense of, you know, we're the experts, we have all the answers, we are the solutions, we are the, and the kind of greenwashing that then flows out of that. Where do you see the role of the universities?
Yeah. So, well, partly the role of the university is to acknowledge this is a complex challenge to which nobody has good answers yet, and it's a joined up interdisciplinary challenge. So see if you can hold workshops, forums, all sorts of things in which you bring people together from different disciplines to explore big global questions, you know, in the knowledge that nobody has the perfect answers. I think that's a really, you know, this interdisciplinary stuff, I think all universities find it difficult. I think it's really, really important. It's where academia should be. And then finally, you know, everything your university does can be oriented towards the sustainability challenge. So, you know, what's in the curriculum, for sure, you know, it should be reflected in just about every curriculum, but also, you know, what is the experience of a student? We have students from all over the world come to Lancaster, and it's such a great opportunity if we take it, and I don't think we do take it as well as we might. It was such a great opportunity for people from all over the world to understand each other, from people from China to understand people from the UK, to understand people from India, you know, all of that, people from Russia, you know, all of that is really, really important.
Fantastic. I'm going to leave the last words actually with Jacqueline, who says, "Thank you, Mike, for this informative wake-up call. It's also hopeful. It's also hopeful as well as enlightening." So clearly she's not sleepwalking anymore. Mike, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you very much, and have a great day. Thank you.
Thank you. You too. Thanks. Bye.
So we're now going to leave this section and go into, there's a split, no, it's not a split section. The next section is going to be on mobility and transport. So you need to leave here and sign into the next bit, and I'll catch up with you later. Thanks very much.